let's start things up today. We have a very special screening, our second last screening in this year's lecture and film series dedicated to the great Iranian director ABBAS KIAROSTAMI. And today we have a very special work. We have his last film, the last film made by Kiarostami, to kind of, let's say, capstone one of the most fundamental oeuvres in the history of cinema. And to help us navigate this film, which I think is also a very unique work, let's say, kind of existing in a kind of unique space between cinema and gallery, installation, video art, let's say. To help us with this film, we have the great Montreal-based film scholar André Habib, professor of film studies at the Université de Montréal. André has published widely on cinema with key works including La Main Gauche de Jean-Pierre Léaud from 2015, L'attrait de la ruine from 2011, as well as the edited collections L'avenir de la mémoire, patrimoine, restauration, réemploi cinématographique from 2012, and most recently in English, Collecting Cinema and Rewriting History Between the Visible and the Invisible from 2025. He was also active in the world of film criticism, film culture, film, let's say, patrimony, film heritage. He edits the journal Hors Champ, the Quebec-based journal, as well as the audiovisual essay platform Zoom Out and the kind of archival project Cadavre Exquis. His research areas kind of, let's say, across the gamut of film studies, but include found footage filmmaking, archives, technological nostalgia, intermediality, and the melancholy associated with these phenomena. But he also has a very particular research interest in Iranian cinema, and we'll see this, on evidence in his lecture tonight on 24 frames. But he's a real, I think, on a personal note, I would say he's, one of the people I've met in my time, as a film studies guy, whose love for cinema is boundless on every level, watching films, but also collecting films. His office is filled with random film prints that he collects from flea markets or people's basements. He's really has this insatiable love for cinema, and I think he'll be sharing and imparting this love to the audience today with a film that is also, I think, really infused with a profound sense of love for the cinema. So that's all I wanted to say. I want to pass over now to André. He will be lecturing for roughly 45 minutes. This is the format of lecture and film. We have a lecture, a guest coming all the way from across the Atlantic Ocean. He'll be talking to us in English about this film. After this nice punchy lecture from André Habib, we'll then have a little break for 10 minutes and then start with the film. And then after the film, we'll have the highlight of the evening, which is the audience discussion afterwards, of course. So you're all welcome to stay for after the film to talk about it with André. So please join me in welcoming now André Habib up to the lectern.
So thank you, Daniel, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you for the invitation. It's my first real time in Frankfurt, and it's been really quite marvelous. Thank you for everybody who's made this screening possible. Thank you to the projectionist and everybody else. So sorry in advance. So a couple of little triggers. So sorry in advance for those of you who will be missing the France-Morocco game, which is on tonight. Maybe someone says, oh no, it's tonight. So I'm going to try and be as enticing and exciting, but it can maybe be a little bit of a hard task. Also, please feel free, for those of you who didn't know, for instance, this lecture was going to go on before the film, and you feel that you need to see the film with kind of a clean slate, I wouldn't be mad if you go out, for a coffee and come back later at 9 just for the screening. I won't take offense. So yeah, just yeah. If I go to a film and have a 45-minute lecture before, may want to have a beer instead of listening to the lecture. So I would totally understand. I also need to tell you a few things. So first of all, there are a few spoilers in this talk. Now, when you see the film, you'll say, okay, that's not really a spoiler, is it? Because it's not really a whodunit type of film. The film, as you see, is quite contemplative, very meditative, almost sleep-inducing, something that Kiarostami would not resent if you were to kind of doze off into the flurry of snow and wind and so on. I think it's part of what this film produces, and I think it's kind of part of what he would actually embrace. So don't feel guilty if you kind of, come in and out of this film. I think it's part of what it is. In relation to the trigger, my hope is also that whatever I will utter in the next 30 or 40 minutes or so will kind of slowly erase itself after the first or the second film. The film is divided in 24 frames, as we'll mention, and kind of leave, like a void in your mind, and you're just going to take each film as it is and each screen as it is and kind of forget everything that I said. Because I think the film, requires you to be in a kind of state of mind to really dig it, not only dig into it, but really dig it, in a kind of a hippie West Coast way of looking at this stuff. This film, Daniel mentioned it, is Kiarostami's last film. It's also a posthumous film, so the film came out and was finished actually by his son and collaborator. I'll get to that in a moment. So it's a film that comes after. So anybody who discovered this film is both watching a film, but also it's a work of mourning for anybody who's watching it. And I think something that is kind of embedded in the very particular nature of this film. As you know, he passed away 10 years ago in 2016. So I'm going to try and kind of delve into this film, not really to explain it. This is not a film that needs to be explained, but more at least show you how I engaged with it when I saw it the first time. The kind of, I guess, the inroads it opened inside me, and the dialogues I think the film entertains. Daniel mentioned this with other different aspects of Kiarostami's oeuvre. So for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with Kiarostami's oeuvre, having a little bit of information as to different art practices Kiarostami explored, mainly photography, installation, and poetry. Those are kind of insights, I think, into what he's trying to do with this particular work. In a way, the film encapsulates all the art forms Kiarostami practiced, although directly sometimes, as in photography, or indirectly, as in poetry. I'll try and talk about this. So it's a kind of synthesis. It's as often last films are. They're kind of synthesis of the poetics of this artist. But it also, and it's something that I will kind of delve into more deeply, it also, I think, inaugurates or hints at a new era of cinema, what scholars would call post-cinema, nach-cinema, or after-cinema, that I think he could only anticipate. I think he had the intuition that something else was coming, something new was arriving, a cinema of total simulation, a cinema of manipulation, a cinema of what we call today deep fakes, where you don't know what is real and what is unreal, where a cinema that questions the very idea of the indexical trace, the photographic imprint, the distinction between what is still, what is moving, images that are still sort of animate themselves, images that are moving are kind of used as stills, and so on. And I think he questions all this. And by questioning, he both, I'd say, reaffirms the importance of this old idea of indexicality and photographic imprint, while at the same time showing its possible obsolescence. As a student, as we were talking about deep fakes in class, mentioned, somebody's like, well, but what difference does it make? Whether it's true or not. Which was for me like a very, very both daunting, scary question, but also I think a very profound one and very thought-stimulating. Does it really matter whether the image is fake or not? Obviously it depends, but in certain instances I think the question is worth asking. Kiarostami is known for saying and doing two things at the same time. showing us always both the window, what is through the window, but also the frame. So showing you both the reality, but also what made this reality possible, the frame itself. And it's, for me, kind of the key to this crazy film, the fact that it's both a window and a frame. And I'm reminded of another last great film that opens perspectives into our current world, which is Harun Farocki's last series called Parallel 1 to 4, which some of you may have seen, which is kind of an exploration on video games, which deals with video game aesthetics in a series of really fascinating visual essays. And it is also, the series, this Parallel 1 to 4, is also a question that questions the premise of cinema and arches back to its origin. Anybody who's interested in the end of something is also, in a way, coming back to the beginning of it. It's this kind of how things go. If you think about the end of something, well, you're also reimagining the possible beginning, either of something else or the beginning of the thing that is ending. So in the same way, I think, if 24 Frames could be seen as Kiarostami's reflection on a certain end of cinema, it also makes sense for us to start at a kind of beginning. In his famous account of a cinematograph screening at the Nizhny Novgorod fair in July 1896, very famous text for anybody who studied a bit of film, Maxim Gorky describes the moment when the lights go down in the room and on the screen appears a large gray picture, a Paris street with the hue of a poor engraving, showing carriages, houses, a crowd frozen in place, a familiar view, until the moment when suddenly the screen is shaken by a strange tremor and the picture comes to life. This anecdote reminds us that the appeal of the cinematograph, at least for the first couple of years, was very much conceived and described in the form of a familiar photograph projected, suddenly brought to life, animated, so to speak. And what was animated was not only the main figure, but also the life of the images, the birds, the waves, the wind, the light, the leaves, life. It is, I think, to these original scenes, these first screenings of the cinematograph with the still image animating itself, that we are kind of drawn to when watching 24 Frames. The film can be described as a collection of familiar photographic views. Anybody who's familiar with the photographic work by Kiarostami recognizes many of these still views. So views, images, pictures taken by the filmmaker, which are suddenly brought to life. And in a certain sense, 24 Frames does indeed seem like an effort to recapture this primal state of cinema, this sort of first, émerveillement, we'd say, this first wonder of cinema, while embracing his, or reevaluating or revisiting his photographic practice, and at the same time adopting a resolutely digital poetic approach to image making. So the film, as you see, demonstrates that a certain confident use of digital technology, even in its artificiality. So the film has an artificial nature. It looks fake, but I think it's part of why the film is also interesting in a very strange way. So this use of digital technology, by reanimating the specter of photography, can succeed in rediscovering a kind of pure state of cinema, even if it's in its sort of ghostly digital afterlife. So these are all the beautiful contradictions that this film, I think, discusses. This singular state would at the same time represent a sort of tipping point between cinema and this other thing. Let us call it, computer-generated imaging or imagery, a state of total yet deliberate indifference between the element of reality and the element of special effects or computer-generated image. The state of the image is perhaps at the same time what allows his cinema to connect with the third major artistic form practiced by Kiarostami, and which seems to have always embodied a sort of point of origin for art, as much for the filmmaker as for an entire culture in Iran, which is poetry. Which I think is kind of the major intertext for a lot of these films, and I'll talk about his poetry in a brief moment. Now, as I mentioned, 24 Frames is fundamentally a very simple project. It's exposed in the first opening credits of the film, the first caption you see. With the help of Ali Kamili, a visual effects specialist, and his son, Ahmad Kiarostami, who completed the work after his death, the filmmaker spent 3 years engaged in a actually complicated task. This is kind of before a lot of these AI tools came out that made what you see in this film quite easy to make today. At the time, he had to actually work a lot harder. So a very laborious task of animating these short vignettes, weaving fiction around a temporal sequence before and after the moment, captured in 23 photographs he had taken over the years. This involved often shooting new scenes, finding corresponding images, adding sound to enhance and deepen this photographic narrative, and deploying often large teams of technicians so that suddenly snow would begin to fall, a flock of birds takes flight, a dog barks and runs, a plane traces a path across the sky, passers-by enter and exit the frame, a horse begins to gallop, the sea churns with an incessant surf, a crow, lands on a window frame, cows cross a road in the mist, etc. I mean, you'll see how this thing gets animated. This transformation of the ordinary, subtle yet striking, whether in the form of satori's or haikus almost, crafted through a skillful arrangement of the world's simplest materials, lies at the intersection constantly of real world and digital poetry, and possibly, like I mentioned, of Kiarostami's poetry, which often takes the form of haikus, like this one, so often very short. You can see that in Persian, they're very, very minimal in their writing. And just sort of moments, little glimpses, like imagist poetry. It's little, thoughts, ideas, moments in the tradition of the haiku. So he's resting not only on Persian poetry, but also, building on a series of other traditions. On the other hand, of Kiarostami's oeuvre, many of his fans or people who are familiar with his work may recognize the photographs that are referred in this project, those taken among others from the albums or exhibitions he made or installations he made, either be Snow White, walls, roads, or a window into life. It may not be the exact image, but the motif is there. So some of the, if you've been watching a lot of these films, or maybe the more recent ones, these are motifs we see, build up in many of his films. There's also a whole wide array of animals that we see in his films, especially the last ones, crows, dogs, sparrows, deers, which feature in this film and that reverberate throughout our memory of the films. I think one of the interesting things about 24 Frames is that it triggers memories or souvenirs or impressions, reminiscences of things we may have seen in other of his films, which I think is one of the beauties of this film. The dogs that we have in 24 Frames can maybe remind one of his first short film, The Bread and the Alley, but also in 5, one of the later digital works, that he made in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. The images of windows, look like a lot of films. The last image from Certified Copy, for instance, or sort of the window frame in Life and Nothing More. Again, in all these shots, we see from a car in which the window frames the landscape, evokes all the vehicle films, Kiarostami loved cars. He loved driving around, and the car is really, I think, one of the tools to think his cinema. Going around Tehran, going around the mountains, taking pictures, which I think he did very, very often. And in a way, his photographic practice is completely tied to his pleasure of riding around with his car, which is obviously a motif of much of his cinema from the 80s and especially the 90s onwards. And then again, it kind of bounces back to some of the photographies he made. And how many, of these other motifs that you will see in this film, solitary trees, bird songs, gusts of wind, all these things you find them both in his poems, in his photography, and in his film. So 24 Frames, in a way, is kind of a film essay, an animated photo album. It's a retrospective film. It's a compendium of his most striking obsessions and visual motifs. It's also a showcase or a collection of visual poems, if you will, which hold, I think, for those who linger over it, an infinite wealth of beauty and secrets. 24 Frames is a poetic celebration of the landscape and nature, flora, fauna, weather, in all its diversity. The few humans we see, apart from those in the Parisian scene, are often depicted off-screen. So there are very little humans in the film, but we hear them so often, or you hear their activity off-screen on the soundtrack. And it's very interesting how man appear in this film. It either appears through gunshots, shooting down birds. It appears through the sound of the saw cutting down trees. And there's a kind of form of pessimism, I suppose, what man does to nature throughout this film, how man destroys nature in a kind of subtle or maybe not so subtle way. But he is saying something about, I think, the relationship of man to nature and how we either can, explore nature's variety and beauty, or we can also instrumentalize it and destroy it and kill it, which is, I think, also these two things are very much part of what Kiarostami is saying. This form of, I suppose, pessimism was also palpable in the final shot of a film called Roads of Kiarostami, which was done in 2005. An essay film which resembles at times a little bit what 24 Frames does. It's composed mainly of photographs taken by the filmmaker, and in which he explores the motif of the road in his own artistic practice, in his films, in his photographies, but also evoking poets, great Iranian poets from Hafez and Seperi and Farrokhzad, who have addressed the motif of the road in their verses. So these things circulate, I think, in an interesting way in relation to 24 Frames. The final image, this is what I want to get to, the final image in Roads of Kiarostami is a photograph of a kind of scrawny dog. You see him there. It's kind of cute, framed by a window, which is, again, a motif we see in 24 Frames, set against a snowy backdrop. And we then see, it's a very surprising moment, kind of superimposition, and you see this atomic bomb explosion in the background. And through this atomic bomb that is exploding in superimposition, we hear the sound. The picture kind of starts burning and disappears, right? Exhausts itself. This is reminiscent of nitrate film that ignites if it's left too long, in the light of the projector. But also the film was commissioned. This film, Roads of Kiarostami, was commissioned for a festival in Seoul for the 60th anniversary of the atomic bomb. So in a way, Roads of Kiarostami, which I think is one of the intertexts or the important films he did before the premises of 24 frames is a sort of meditation on peace, on contemplation, on the beauty of nature. But it's also a reminder at the same time, in the very end of the film, goes in this direction of the flip side, the reverse of all these things, war, destruction, death, which can sweep everything away in an instant. And the film Roads of Kiarostami was released in, I believe, in 2004 or 2005, around the time of the not so successful invasion by Iraq of Americans in Iraq, and around the time Iran began its nuclear program and Ahmadinejad took power. So this is kind of the backdrop for a lot of these films. You can wonder, are the 23 photographs of 24 frames telling us anything but this as well, that this image of beauty also has off-screen space, a counter shot, which is one of violence and terror and horror. There's this quote by Godard, I love to say, it's l'image est bonheur, mais près d'elle séjourne le néant. The image is happiness. It's a promise of happiness, but always near it, near this happiness, inhabits void, oblivion. It's always near, And I think this is something that is I see in every image of 24 frames, and I think it does also speak to us today. He did this film in 2006, around the time of Trump's first election, first mandate, and we're watching this film today. We're watching the continuation of a very ill-advised war with Iran that has killed thousands, without mentioning, obviously, the unnameable violence that is still being unleashed in Gaza, the West Bank, and in Sudan and in Ukraine. These are all things that are, at least in my mind, as I watch this film. Some of you may be saying to themselves, did he say 24 photographs? Isn't this film called 24 frames? In fact, no, I did not lie, because the first frame is not a photograph, it's a painting. It's a painting by Bruegel the Elder's, so his painting of hunters in the snow, in which we find snow, dogs, crows, hunters, which are all things that will reappear throughout the film. The image is kind of a programmatic image in a way, and he will start animating it as you see. You'll even see a kind of herd of cows going across in the background. This reference, I think, serves as a reminder of just how Kiarostami's influences are to be found not only in Iranian culture, Iranian poetry, but he was also, I suppose, one of the great last humanist artists we have that embrace both East and West cultures, and he was capable of bringing it in his work and having this dialogue, which I think we really need today, being able to talk about and kind of imagine maybe not a universal culture, but some kind of dialogue between cultures, which is something that Kiarostami cared a lot for. And what is interesting also, of course, that as we watch 24 frames, we realize how elusive this geography is. So apart from the images shot in Paris with the Eiffel Tower, this could be in many, many places. It doesn't necessarily have to be Iran, and maybe it is in Iran. Maybe it is some other place, some other place he may have visited, either Turkey or some place in Europe, or, who knows. So this elusive geography, I think, is an important feature of the film. But there is this Parisian cliché, you will see, which is very surprising when it pops up with these tourists. They could be Iranian tourists visiting Paris. And I'm, of course, reminded, as you may be as well, that Kiarostami passed away, not in Iran, but in Paris. He died in a Parisian hospital as a mere tourist, I suppose. And it's something I keep thinking about in front of this very moving frame. So as I've been saying, in more than one respect, 24 frames shares affinities with films you may know or maybe have discovered in this series, like I mentioned the film Five or Roads of Kiarostami. And these two films, it is probably worth recalling, also date from around the same period that he started publishing his own poetry. So somehow between his collection of poems, these short digital films, and 24 frames, there is very clearly a dialogue that he was kind of entertaining among these different art forms. And clearly, as you know, around this time, 2004-5, Kiarostami had completely was totally engaged with digital technology. Was very much into the small cameras, the freedom, the lightness these small cameras provide him. They started as early as Taste of Cherry, Le Goût de la Cerise, Tamégoulas, and then went on until the end of his life. And in a way, 24 frames is kind of the ultimate digital film in a certain respect. And two films, I think, really resonate with 24 frames. One is Roads of Kiarostami, which I mentioned, a film that explores his photographic practice through the lens of Iranian poetry. And Five, if you haven't seen it, it's an absolutely stunning film made up of 5 sequence shots. The last one is actually a trick sequence shot. It's not a continuous, but it's a very, very beautifully crafted film, which dwells on the minute, the miniature, the detail, the almost nothing. Very, very banal scenes, but somehow he's able to induce these poetic moments through this. And the film Five is also dedicated to Ozu. And possibly, Japanese art. So again, he's also engaging with these other cultures and other art forms. But let's get back just to 24 frames just a moment. So as you will see, each animated frame is preceded by a title card that numbers it. So you have frame number 1, frame number 2, frame number 3. And so we're always caught in a kind of interplay between the contemplation of the thing we were watching and then the detachment of sudden, because we're reminded we are watching something and this is going down from 1 to 24, which is very, very Kiarostami, both showing you the reality, getting you in, and then showing you that this is also a fabrication. The film plays on the polysemy, the polysemic nature of the word frame also. So the idea of frames, frame number 1, frame number 2, etc., refers obviously to the photographic frame and the cadrage. And as we'll see, many of these frames depict a frame within a frame. And the frame is also the photogramme, the still, right, on a slip of film. The frame is also the little minimal unit of a film. 24 frames corresponds to 1 second. In a sound film, it runs through the projector, 24 frames corresponds to a second. So this idea that these 24 frames somehow represent 1 second is also something that he's playing on. And as you know, very often when you buy a roll of photographic film, they come in rolls of 24, right? So this idea of 24 frames is playing both for the photographic, both for the cinema. Yes. This aspect of the film reminds me also of, very briefly, of a Michael Snow film. I'll just bring a bit of Snow and a bit of Montreal to the talk. A film done in 1969 called 1 Second in Montreal. And the film is a pun because there's 30 images, still images, but it's a moving film. 30 still images, all shot at 1/30th of a second. So you have 30 images, 30 photographs shot at 1/30th of a section, the aperture. Well, that makes up 1 second, right? 30 times 1 and 30 makes 1 second. So hence the title, 1 second in Montreal. And in a way, we could call this film, 24 frames, 1 second with Kiarostami. Obviously, duration is an important aspect of this film. It's each segment lasts a certain number of time. Obviously, the idea of the 24 frames also, any of you who have seen Le Petit Soldat, remember, or just pick up the line, this famous line from Godard's Le Petit Soldat, le cinéma, la photographie, c'est la vérité, et le cinéma, c'est 24 fois la vérité par seconde. So photography is truth, but film is 24 times truth every second. Possibly, Kiarostami picked that up with this idea of 24 frames in a film which is very much a lie, in the sense that a lot of the stuff that you see does not exist. It's animated, computer generated. So this tension between the truth of the image and the fakeness of the image is also at the core of this film. So, which is also interesting in the sense that the film is also, this is Kiarostami's most fiercely digital film. It's also a film about the memory of film, and the memory of the material base of film. We would say the film stock, right down to the choice, which baffled me for a certain time, of having each frame, each scene, last exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds, 4.5 minutes. At first I thought, okay, maybe it's a reference to John Cage's 4 minutes 33, the famous silent work by John Cage. And I sort of went back to my Kodak film calculator, and I realized that 4.5 minutes is precisely the duration of a 400 feet roll of 35 millimeter film. Kiarostami, all his life up until the 1990s, shot film on film. So he precisely knew that 4.5 minutes is exactly the type of duration you have to shoot a roll of 400 feet film in your 35 millimeter camera. So he obviously knew this very much. The idea also of going back to film, the very nature of film, the very nature of photography, harks back to a phrase he says to Youssef Ishakpour when he says, "For me, a photograph has value from the point of view of photographic art only on condition that it has not been altered or cropped at the time of printing." So this sort of obedience to what was captured on film, like no trickery, I'm just going to expose this negative, and this is going to be what the picture is. Photography is truth, and this truth is based on the photographic material, of which, like I mentioned, all these traces, the polysemy of the word frames, the duration of each segment, is kind of referring back to. And then, what about truth in this film, which is, as you'll see, all about simulation and computer-animated mystification. 24 Frames is a very odd film in this respect. It's a film that is a world away from the photographic act and its very nature as a non-manipulable trace. And one can say that it is a film that is far removed from the cinema that Kiarostami has always practiced, even if this porosity between the manipulated and the real has always been at the heart of his cinema, from close-up to Shireen. What is fake, what is true, what is reenacted is also very fundamental to his cinema. I would say that this blurring of the lines between the captured and the fabricated, between animation and the photographic, between Lumière and Méliès, in the end, this is really a film about Lumière and Méliès, is part of the film's poetic power, taking the form of a very uncanny strangeness. So between the photographic and the animated, the computer-generated, and it's in this in-between that he wants us to inhabit for 2 hours. It forces us with every shot to question, to challenge the nature of the visible that presents itself to our eyes, and constantly ask, but what on earth am I watching? But what on earth am I watching? The film's, this is to give you a sense of the kind of artificiality of the image. The film's final frame, which is the most unusual and also very moving, shows a teenager, it's not clear if it's a boy or a girl, in a kind of strange hairdo, asleep on their forearm in front of a Macintosh computer, framed by a huge window through which we see these trees as the day breaks during the duration of the segment. On the computer screen, amidst the Photoshop windows, and we suppose that a lot of 24 frames was crafted in Photoshop or some other computer or some other software, there's another window. So there's a window, and then there's all these windows, the computer screen, and there's another window on front where you see Teresa Wright's face during the equally moving final of William Wyler's masterpiece, The Best Years of Our Lives, of 1946, when Kiarostami was about 6. I'm not sure if he saw the film in Tehran when he was a kid or if he discovered it much later. The scene, so the last segment, the very last portion of The Best Years of Our Lives, is shown, frame by frame during the duration of the end of this film, delaying the moment of the final kiss with Dana Andrews. Anybody who's seen The Best Years of Our Lives, I mean, we all want to cry when that scene pops up, before the customary the end. The frame is a fascinating tribute to American cinema, which is moving, coming from a person who lives in a country for him the U.S. is the great Satan since 1979. It's also a very beautiful reflection on time, love as a melancholic, ironic possibly, and moving farewell, as a new day, dawns, a new day both in the literal sense, but also a new day for cinema, in a way. This is what he's, I think, talking about. He delivers here what must surely be called the most fascinating happy ending of his entire filmography, and which perhaps offers us one of the keys to that poetic invention that runs throughout his poems, his photographs, his films. How do you manage to concentrate in a single space and time, with very minimal means, an infinity of poetic and expressive possibilities? Think of the end of Close-Up. Think of the end of Through the Olive Trees. Think of the end of Where's the Friend's Home? The end of Taste of Cherry, or any of these films, which often end, by the way, with a still image, which I find very interesting. Since this posthumous ending is also his last, as we watch this, at least as I watch it, I can't keep myself from hearing, very softly spoken, with this beautiful voice Kiarostami had, as if not to rouse us fully, his voice whispering to us from beyond the grave, from beyond the frame, "You ain't seen nothing yet." Thank you.
Thanks everyone for staying. We'll maybe just have a brief little chat about the film if people have questions. It's getting late, and it's getting into the second half of France Morocco now. Maybe I wanted to start with the presence of animals in this film, because they are very present in the film. And I was actually thinking, in a sense, almost to the detriment of humanity, that they're, the human world is kind of sometimes present on the screen, but a lot of the time just on the margins of the screen or just slightly off screen. And animals are really center of screen, really focalized in a way that is rare in cinema. And I wonder, why animals at this point? What's the,
I mean, I was thinking about this and how I didn't insist maybe as much as I could have in my presentation. Thank you for staying, by the way. You're very, very kind and generous. I give you three answers, different answers. One is purely technological. I think animating animals is somewhat easier than having to animate humans. So if the characters in the Paris shot had to move, it would have been even worse than animating a duck. So I think that's purely on a technical level. The other level is, I think that starting with his photography is void of humans, which is a paradox in the sense that he is probably the most interested in his films with the human condition up until 10 and those films. And then after a while, even Certified Copy is very much about human relationships, and all his when he was doing fiction, I don't know anybody who went that deep into human relations, but his photography is completely void of humans, unless except for the photographer, which is sometimes you can sense his presence. So I think that since the scenes had a photographic base, it would kind of justify the fact that it's a continuation of his photographic practice. The third thing I think is that you look at Five, so the other video film he made, you look at his poetry, it is a poetry of kind of a world without humans, where the only human is the person observing the little phenomena of nature. And I don't know what his exact state of mind was at the end of his life, but he was somebody who was, in a way, forced to exile, not because he had to live elsewhere, but he was, I think he didn't want to do, but couldn't do the films he wanted to do in Iran, the fiction films. So the two last fiction films he made were in Italy, in Japan, and what he could do in Iran were these miniature films, where all of a sudden, he didn't have to deal with humans. This being said, there are a lot of humans around. So there's the animal wrangler. There's, 9 people who are coordinating animals. So they're like directing cows and stuff like that. So, I mean, a lot of the things you see are actual real animals who are directed, and, you see them, they're not there, they're off screen. But I think in the end, when we watch this, one cannot think about, this reflection, not only about, absence of humans, but also how we treat animals. What is our rapport to animals? Do we have animal relationship to animals? Or do we have human relationships to animals? Are we projecting human relations to these crows and these sparrows and these cows? Or are we trying to look at them from the perspective of the animal, or from the perspective of the dynamic between the environment and the animals? Which I think is, there's a big trend now in kind of, humanities to think, the more than human, and to think in a kind of more holistic way. And I think this film fits in very nicely in this. And the only rapport humans have with animals is either killing them. I should have triggered you. That scene is terrible. The deer killing the bird and running over, almost running over the crows and the pigeons. The humans are completely indifferent or violent to animals in this film, which I think says a lot about our dire humanity. So, this is how we treat humans. Look at how we treat other humans. Animals, look at how we treat humans.
There's an interesting irony there, because the adjective that's probably most associated with his films is humanist. And here we see a kind of almost a trajectory away from the human, almost to a kind of transhumanist, or like, I don't know, actually much more ecological vision. By the same token, you evoked this a little bit, but there's there's a lot of signs of life in the film. There's also a lot of signs of death. There's animals being hunted, but there's also animals being prey to other animals. So it's not just humans doing the killing, it's actually also like animals devouring each other and so on and so forth.
There's a beautiful, there's a sort of life goes on moment about it, which is, refers to one of the earlier films you saw. This incredible moment where the seagull is killed, and all the birds flee, and there's one bird that's sort of there and kind of mourning the seagull. I mean, I don't know if mourning is the right word, but it's, laying around and kind of waiting. And then eventually another seagull comes and the rest of them come, and it's like, we have to live on. It's a very, very moving thing to me. He's also this meditation. I mean, meditation on life is a meditation on death. Meditation on death is meditation on life, which is something that's always in his films. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Possibly.
Well, I couldn't help also but thinking that there are signs of death in the film in a metaphorical level as well, like the snow, the waves, the leaves. These all seem to be freighted with this kind of sense of mortality. There's a universe that will go on afterwards, but there's also a profound sadness or melancholy about the prospect of one's own, in his case, impending demise, let's say.
I think there's something like that. I mean, it's also, it's for the most part, a winter film, except for a couple of scenes. And even the spring scene you have in frame 23, what do? They cut the trees, right? So even the possibility of something burgeoning, something, flourishing is kind of cut down, and the only sign of life disappears, and you're only left with cut wood. So it's a very, in a way, it's a very, very pessimistic film and very gloomy, very melancholy. And I think he was maybe by that point quite aware that he had, he didn't have that much time to live. But then again, there's that ending, this power of love, this horrible song. I hate that song. I should have warned you.
Yeah, that required a trigger warning.
Andrew Lloyd Webber should obviously have, before it starts, something. Yeah.
We have a roving mic. Alex will pass around. Is there a question? Yes, Eustace. This is not working. All right, you can run around with that one.
You can have the book. There's also a lot of... Sorry.
Yes. You've now already mentioned the shooting, and what I had to think about in those moments is, of course, that shooting is also a term we use for film. And I don't know how it is in Persian and in all the other languages spoken in Iran, but it is something that I know isn't just in English. And I do remember, and André will maybe now know where I'm going with this, Gustav Deutsch quote, where he essentially says that shooting someone with a camera and shooting someone with a gun is only different in the sense how long that person will live afterwards. And so I asked myself if that is, not sort of also moving you towards a meditation of what film is actually doing. Is it animating, coming from, I think, Latin animare, giving life, or is it killing, which is, not so much in film studies, but in poetic discussions of films has been a big topos. So I don't know.
Yeah. It's taxidermy. I'll make it easier for you. It's preserving life that is potentially dead, and by the time you watch the film, it is probably dead. So it is a form of taxidermy, preserving the appearance of life. If you want. It's one way of doing it. But I think he had a more. I think he's somebody who observed nature very, very closely. I think he observed animals very closely. He thought that they were very instructive. There's. I don't know why I thought about this, and I'll tell you because it's a beautiful story. When I was in Egypt many years ago, there were these strange sculptures, stone sculptures of baboons, and they had their arms were like this, and their bellies were prominent. And the person who was doing the tour said, for a number of years we wondered what those baboons were doing there and why were they in this position and in this towards the sun. And the obvious hypothesis, and this is from the hieroglyphs and so on, is that Hatshepsut had brought all these exotic animals like baboons from Africa, from the south, that they had conquered to Egypt. And for a baboon, Egypt in the morning, was kind of, I have a point to the story, is fairly cold in the morning. So the baboons, when they would wake up, they would go towards the sun to kind of warm their bellies. And the Egyptians who didn't have, TikTok were looking around, observing this very interesting. And they said, this is very interesting that baboons do this. They must have some kind of relationship to the god of sun, right? They pray like us. But it's less the mythological or the belief system. It's just the fact that they watched baboons every morning for a number of days, probably weeks, months, until they developed an interpretive system that allowed them to create this very holistic, world that made sense. It's less the interpretation than the fact that if you spend some time with animals looking at them, they reveal something very deep, I think, in the nature of the nature of animals, why animals do what they do, how do they comport themselves. And I think this is something that Kiarostami was very much into, like looking at animals and seeing how animals, in a way, are revealing something, and how they also, if we just pay attention to them, it's very hard to decipher exactly what the intention is. This is something that André Bazin says all about animals. He loved animals because they were undecipherable. You cannot project your own human ideas on animals. They're totally mysterious and opaque, and they're fascinating for this reason. You don't know from one second to the next what an animal will do. And that's a beautiful thing. And this is one of the powers of cinema, is to, for instance, show a reality that is not pre-decided. You do not know what will happen. And animals are good at that, and I love animal films for that reason. The good ones, not the ones that tell you, and this is when the baboon, they're like, no, just cut the sound, just look at the animals. So just to get back to that, I think Kiarostami is objectively interested in animals. He also knows what we do to animals. So I think there is that. I don't know if it's like the my camera's a gun thing. I think in Kiarostami's case, his camera is a lot more distant and careful and respectful up to a certain extent. It's, trying to... And there's a couple moments where the camera is acknowledged, right? There's a dog at some point that turns around and looks at the camera and starts barking, like, what are you doing here? There's 2 moments to 3 moments where this camera, which in the end, was a camera, but at this point it's just, computer-generated synthesis of something. But yeah, I mean, the good thing with this film is that it gives you a lot of time to think about what am I watching and why am I watching this? Why is this interesting? What can we do with this image? Which is, what poetry does, what great literature does, what great photos do, what great films do. Give you time and freedom to kind of discover what it is to be alive,
Thank you very much for the introduction and also this extraordinary film, which requires kind of repaid watching. It struck me 2 things. One is the fact that both Tarkovsky and Kiarostami are using Hunters in the Snow, and whether a conversation of some sort is being staged here, in terms of the ways in which the image from Bruegel is actually mobilized at different moments in Tarkovsky to different effect. With different effect. I mean, certainly, movement was a key dimension when we first see this in things like Soliaris, and it's the involuntary human movement as gravity kind of releases, as the release of gravity releases bodies, and as we flow around the painting. The second thing is the continuous reproduction of that effect in things like Mirror, where you again, it's a reprise. And as if it's a recalibration and a continuous inquiry into this relationship between these figures, minuscule, in this larger kind of landscape, which always struck me. When you mentioned that Kiarostami is actually, if anything, deeply humanist and interested in the human condition, it was always, for me, in my memory, and I've not seen him in the recent stuff after, probably the last one was 10. But in terms of the landscape, a kind of the geography, the spatial frame within which he operates became quite crucial in and trying to decipher that. And where is my friend's house? How do you actually kind of map yourself in relationship to the world around you? Which came back to my early one thought. Kiarostami starts out in educational cinema. And this relationship here, it's like you're continuously being invited to actually reflect on what you are seeing and how you are seeing it and through what means that is happening. And there seems to be a zone of the undecipherable, which is continuously emplotted and becomes actually a kind of allure, a kind of for the eye, for actually what is that space, what is it composed of, what is this body, is it dead, is it reanimating, and where is it in relationship to other things? Maybe they're not co-present. And it's to do with the digital and the cinematic and the photographic that none of these things are necessarily there at the same time, in the same fashion. So what are we looking at? So there's a kind of invitation, it seems, to reflect on perception itself and what it facilitates. So is there something here, a last one, the ethological, actually about movement itself, becomes where animal movement became an object of interest. I think your argument is that this is not about us looking. It's about what is that movement about and how does it constitute itself, separate from our perception of it. So there are a series of things around, I think, perception, the education of what we're looking at and the technologies through which we're looking at this. And I cannot help but remember that Tarkovsky and Kiarostami are dying at the same time as they're looking at these things. And that becomes almost inscribed in the ways they're looking.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to unpack there, but thank you very much for all the great insights. Happy the film provoked all these thoughts in you. When you mentioned Tarkovsky, I was thinking a lot about Tarkovsky and The Sacrifice, his last film and so on, and it completely escaped my mind that Brücke also appears in. So I have to go back into the mirror and Solaris to kind of see what he was doing with it. But it would make sense. I don't know if there is, if Kiarostami somewhere says, there maybe is, I don't have it off the top of my mind, Tarkovsky was interesting for this reason, I saw his films. We're unsure. I know there's an interview in Cahiers du Cinéma between Kurosawa and Tarkovsky and Kiarostami, which I found really interesting because they have the same initials, and they thought it was interesting to put them together in a room. I know Tarkovsky had a huge influence on a lot of Iranian filmmakers. That I'm sure. I know the person I'll be talking about in your seminar tomorrow was deeply influenced by Tarkovsky. So clearly the text, I'm almost certain the texts were translated, and the films, they have an incredible bootleg culture in Iran. So these films were very clearly circulating. This relationship between time, poetry, memory, his father was a poet, this presence of poetry in all the images. He's also a still photographer, a lot of incredible pictures that Tarkovsky took. So I think there is, at least, for us, a dialogue, I think, and I think it's interesting to think them together. For the question of education, I think there is something pedagogical about his cinema. He started out, yes, as a graphic artist, and then he started doing these films but before that he was a person who was organizing traffic. He was which I always find very moving. He was in the middle of the city directing traffic, and then he became a graphic artist. But it's a thing that always makes a lot of sense to me, that he went from that to the mise en scène, because it required to be everywhere at the same time, to look at the cars, look at the whatever, people walking, the donkeys, the bikes, the motorcycles, this perception, you need to, if you're a traffic manager, traffic, you have to have a very, very acute eye, and also very careful for people, that people don't get run over and so on. I don't know. There's it's this aesthetic of care that comes with the traffic person. But no, I think his humanism is also through the way he looks, the way he is not telling you how to watch and perceive, but opening up, in a kind of almost Heideggerian way, like opening up or revealing a potential of reality, but for you to grasp and for you to engage with and for you to enter. And this perception could be both human, but also possibly, and this is something that is very, very contemporary, while trying to imagine what a perception could be that would not be human perception, but you only have human perception. So how do you perceive the perception of a sparrow from the perception of our human condition? There's all these, books about, how does a spider feel the world, like this idea that, if we could see the world, if we could perceive reality as a spider would, maybe we can, engage more profoundly with nature and with, the more than human. But I think there is in his incredible, I think he has faith in humanity. To make a film like this, you must have faith in humanity. So this idea that people can sit down for 2 hours and watch this, you have an incredible faith in people's capacity. I'm giving you something, it's going to be a hard watch, but for some reason, I won't be around in this room to see what it does because I'm, off. But I have faith that people will take this film, embrace it, and do something with it. So I think for that, even if there isn't any human, the fact that he made this film, I think, is an incredible, beautiful gesture towards humans and maybe more than humans who are going to watch this in 400 years, who knows? You can take the films into the night, as Stan Brakhage said. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so just a reminder, next week we round out the series with Life and Nothing More, aka Life Goes On. It's a film with a few different titles. So that'll be Thursday the 16th of July. I will be lecturing on the film. That's how we round out our lecture and film series on Kiarostami. I think there's no better way to finish the series on. But thank you once again, André, for a magnificent lecture and a profoundly moving experience, I think, watching this film with all of you. So see you all next week. And André will be on campus tomorrow at 10 a.m. for our TFM students. So do come along to that as well.